Sarah Martinez shifted uncomfortably in the hard wooden chair, her 7-month pregnant belly making it impossible to find a comfortable position. The courtroom felt cold and unwelcoming, nothing like the warm home she had been building with Marcus for the past 3 years. She placed both hands protectively over her unborn daughter, trying to calm the nervous fluttering in her stomach that had nothing to do with baby kicks. Across the aisle sat Victoria Blake, a woman Sarah had never wanted to meet but now knew far too well. Victoria looked nothing like what Sarah had imagined when Marcus first confessed to his affair 6 months ago. She was younger, maybe 25, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Even more painful was how put together Victoria appeared, while Sarah felt like a tired, swollen mess in her maternity dress. Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in an expensive suit, was setting up his papers with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. Sarah watched as Victoria whispered something to him, and they both glanced in her direction. Victoria's lips curved into what could only be described as a satisfied smile. It made Sarah's skin crawl. This shouldn't be happening, Sarah thought to herself, remembering how different her life had been just 1 year ago. She and Marcus had been trying for a baby for 2 years, going through fertility treatments and countless doctor visits. When she finally got pregnant, they were over the moon. Marcus had painted the nursery himself, picking out soft yellow colors because they wanted to be surprised about the baby's gender. Those happy memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. The affair had started, according to Marcus, during a work conference in Chicago. He was a sales manager for a tech company, and Victoria worked for one of their client firms. Marcus claimed it was just a few nights, a terrible mistake that meant nothing. But Victoria's presence in this courtroom, holding a 6-month-old baby boy, suggested the story was much more complicated than Marcus had admitted. Sarah's lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Chen, leaned over and whispered, "Remember, we're here because she's demanding child support. Marcus has already agreed to take the DNA test, so we just need to get through this process." Mrs. Chen had been recommended by Sarah's sister, and while she seemed competent, Sarah couldn't help feeling like she was drowning in legal terms and procedures she didn't understand. Victoria stood up when the judge called the case, and Sarah noticed how she deliberately held her baby where everyone could see him. The little boy had dark hair like Marcus, but then again, lots of babies had dark hair. Victoria walked to the front of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had been there before, though Sarah didn't know why she had that thought. "Your Honor," Victoria's lawyer began, "my client is here today seeking financial support for her son, who was fathered by the defendant, Marcus Martinez, during their relationship last year." The word relationship hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had called it a mistake, but Victoria's lawyer was calling it a relationship. Victoria took the witness stand, and Sarah found herself studying the other woman's face. There was something cold about Victoria's eyes, even when she was holding her baby. She spoke clearly and confidently as she began to tell her story. "I met Marcus at the Palmer Hotel in Chicago in March of last year," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "He told me he was having problems in his marriage, that his wife couldn't have children." Sarah's heart stopped. That was a lie. They had been trying to have children, working with doctors, but there was nothing wrong with either of them. The fertility issues were just bad luck, something that happens to many couples. Victoria continued. "We stayed in touch after Chicago. He would call me when he was traveling for work, and we would meet in different cities. He promised me that he was going to leave his wife once he figured out how to do it without hurting her too badly." More lies. Marcus had never mentioned leaving. In fact, right around the time Victoria claimed they were having this ongoing relationship, Marcus had surprised Sarah with a weekend trip to Napa Valley to celebrate their 3rd wedding anniversary. The baby in Victoria's arms started to fuss, and she bounced him gently while continuing her testimony. "When I found out I was pregnant, I told Marcus right away. He was scared at first, but then he seemed excited about having a son. He even helped me pick out the name, Jason." Sarah felt sick. Marcus had wanted to name their daughter Jessica after his grandmother. The similarity to Jason felt like another small cruelty. Marcus visited us in the hospital when Jason was born, Victoria claimed, looking directly at Sarah as she spoke. He held his son and told me he loved us both. But then he stopped returning my calls. I think his wife found out about us and made him choose. Victoria's voice cracked slightly, as if she was fighting back tears. I'm not asking for much, Your Honor. Just enough to help me take care of our son. Sarah wanted to scream. Every word out of Victoria's mouth felt like a carefully crafted lie, designed to make Marcus look like a deadbeat father, and Sarah look like the jealous wife who was keeping a man from his child. But what made it worse was that some of it might be true. Marcus had admitted to the affair. He had admitted to being in Chicago those dates. What if there was more he hadn't told her? Marcus sat beside Sarah, his face pale and his hands clenched in his lap. She could see the stress in the way his jaw was set, in the way he kept running his hand through his hair. When Victoria mentioned the hospital visit, Sarah saw him shake his head slightly, but he couldn't speak yet. They had to wait for his turn. Victoria's lawyer pulled out a folder thick with papers. Your Honor, we have evidence of the ongoing relationship between my client and Mr. Martinez. He began showing photographs. Marcus and Victoria at what looked like a restaurant. Marcus and Victoria walking together on a street Sarah didn't recognize. Marcus and Victoria in what appeared to be a hotel lobby. Each photograph felt like a punch to Sarah's chest. She had seen some of these places in the background of Marcus's work trip photos, but he had never mentioned Victoria being there. In one photo, Victoria was laughing at something Marcus was saying, and he had his hand on her arm. They looked comfortable together, familiar, not like people who had just met for a business conference. We also have text messages, Victoria's lawyer continued, showing Mr. Martinez's promises of support and his expressions of love for both my client and their child. Sarah's throat felt tight. Love? Marcus had told her the affair was just physical, a stupid mistake during a difficult time in their marriage. But if there were love letters? The worst part was watching Victoria during all of this. She wasn't crying or emotional like someone who had been abandoned by the father of her child. Instead, she kept glancing at Sarah with what looked almost like satisfaction, as if she was enjoying watching Sarah's world fall apart piece by piece. Sarah thought about the timing Victoria was claiming. March through August of the previous year. During that time, Sarah had been dealing with her mother's cancer diagnosis, flying back and forth to Phoenix to help with treatments. Marcus had been supportive, or so she thought. He had encouraged her to spend as much time as needed with her family. Had he been encouraging her absence so he could be with Victoria? The baby started crying, and Victoria stood up to comfort him. As she swayed back and forth, she looked over at Marcus with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. It wasn't the look of a woman seeking justice for her child. It was the look of a woman who was winning a game that Sarah didn't even know they were playing. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the amount of evidence Victoria seemed to have. Photos, text messages, hotel receipts. It painted a picture of something much bigger than the few-night mistake Marcus had confessed to. Either Marcus had lied to her about the extent of the affair, or Victoria was lying about everything. Given what she was seeing and hearing, Sarah was starting to wonder if she knew her husband at all. As Victoria continued her testimony, Sarah felt the room growing warmer. Or maybe it was just her. The stress of listening to intimate details about her husband's affair was making her feel sick in ways that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She tried to focus on breathing steadily, but every word Victoria spoke made it harder. Marcus used to tell me that his wife didn't understand him, Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtroom. He said she was always worried about getting pregnant, that it was all she could think about. He felt like she saw him as just a way to have a baby, not as a person. Sarah's hands tightened on the armrests of her chair. That wasn't true. Yes, she had wanted children desperately. But she loved Marcus for who he was, not just as a potential father. The worst part was that Victoria was describing private conversations, things that Marcus could have only told her during intimate moments. Sarah had shared her fears about infertility with Marcus during their most vulnerable times together. To hear those private worries twisted and used against her in a courtroom felt like the ultimate betrayal. Victoria's lawyer asked her to describe specific dates and locations. "Tell the court about your meeting in Denver last June," he said, consulting his notes. Sarah remembered June clearly. Marcus had been gone for 4 days on what he said was a client emergency. He had called her every night, telling her how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to come home. But Victoria was now describing dinners and long walks and evening conversations that would have happened during those same phone calls. "We talked about our future together," Victoria continued, bouncing little Jason gently as he started to get fussy again. "Marcus said he wanted to be a good father, that he had always dreamed of having a son to teach about sports and cars. He was excited when I told him I was having a boy." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. She and Marcus had talked about their dreams for their children, too. He had said he would be happy with either a boy or a girl, but she remembered him lighting up when they talked about teaching a son to play baseball like his father had taught him. The baby's crying was getting louder, and Victoria seemed to be using it for dramatic effect. She held Jason up slightly so the judge could see him better. "Look at him, Your Honor. Look at those eyes, that nose. He looks just like his father." Sarah found herself staring at the baby despite herself. He did have Marcus's dark eyes and the same shaped nose. But lots of babies looked like lots of people. That didn't prove anything, did it? Sarah's head was starting to pound. The fluorescent lights in the courtroom seemed too bright, and the air felt thick and hard to breathe. She had been having problems with her blood pressure during this pregnancy, something her doctor had warned her to watch carefully. The stress of the last few months, finding out about the affair, dealing with Victoria's pregnancy claims, preparing for this court case, had made it worse. Victoria's lawyer pulled out more evidence. Phone records showing calls between Marcus and Victoria that lasted for hours. Sarah remembered those nights when Marcus said he was working late, taking important calls with clients. Had he really been talking to Victoria all those times? The betrayal felt deeper with every piece of evidence. It wasn't just that Marcus had been unfaithful. It was that he had been living a complete double life. "Your Honor, I have hotel receipts showing that Mr. Martinez paid for rooms in 4 different cities where my client was also present," the lawyer continued. "Phoenix, Denver, San Antonio, and Las Vegas. These weren't business trips where they happened to run into each other. These were planned meetings." Sarah's vision started to blur slightly around the edges. Phoenix was where her mother lived. Had Marcus been meeting Victoria while Sarah was taking care of her sick mother? Victoria shifted Jason to her other arm and looked directly at Sarah as she spoke her next words. "Marcus told me that his wife was cold and distant, that she only cared about having a baby and not about him as a person. He said she made him feel like a failure every time another month went by without getting pregnant." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She had never said anything like that to Marcus. Yes, she had been disappointed month after month when the pregnancy tests came back negative. But she had tried so hard not to make Marcus feel bad about it. Sarah's heart was racing now, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning in the courtroom. The baby in her belly was moving more than usual, as if responding to her stress. Her doctor had warned her that high stress could be dangerous for both her and the baby, especially this late in pregnancy. Victoria continued describing their relationship with an intimacy that made Sarah feel sick. She talked about inside jokes they shared, about Marcus's favorite foods, about the way he liked his coffee in the morning. These weren't things you learned during a few casual encounters. This was the kind of knowledge that came from spending real time together, from having an actual relationship. "He used to bring me flowers," Victoria said with a small smile. "Yellow roses, because he said they reminded him of sunshine." Sarah's chest tightened painfully. Yellow roses were what Marcus brought her on their first anniversary. He had said the same thing about sunshine. Was nothing in their relationship real? Had every sweet gesture, every romantic moment been something he shared with other women? The courtroom started to feel like it was spinning slightly. Sarah gripped the edge of the table in front of her, trying to steady herself. Mrs. Chen noticed and leaned over. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong enough to get through this, but she was feeling worse by the minute. Victoria's voice seemed to be coming from far away now, even though she was only a few feet away. "When Jason was born, Marcus was the first person I called. He came to the hospital that same day. He held his son and cried, told me he had never felt love like that before." Sarah's hands went instinctively to her own belly. This was supposed to be Marcus's first child. These were supposed to be feelings he would experience for the first time when their daughter was born in 2 months. The room was definitely spinning now. Sarah could hear her heartbeat in her ears, loud and fast. The bright lights seemed to be pulsing, making it hard to focus on anything. She tried to take deep breaths, but it felt like there wasn't enough air in the room. Marcus, who had been sitting silently beside her throughout Victoria's testimony, suddenly noticed that something was wrong. He turned to look at Sarah and saw that her face had gone pale and she was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Sarah?" he whispered, but she couldn't respond. The room was tilting now, and Victoria's voice was becoming just noise in the background. "I can't," Sarah managed to whisper to Mrs. Chen, but the words felt thick and strange in her mouth. "I can't breathe." Her vision was getting darker around the edges, and she could feel herself starting to slide sideways in her chair. Victoria was still talking, describing more details about her relationship with Marcus, but her voice seemed to be coming from underwater now. Sarah tried to focus on staying upright, on protecting her baby, but her body wasn't cooperating anymore. The last thing Sarah saw before everything went black was Victoria's face, turned toward her with an expression that looked more annoyed than concerned. Even as Sarah was collapsing, Victoria seemed frustrated that the attention was being taken away from her testimony. Then darkness closed in, and Sarah heard nothing but the sound of people shouting and chairs scraping against the floor as the courtroom erupted into chaos around her unconscious form. Sarah woke up in a hospital bed with bright white lights above her and the steady beeping of monitors nearby. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. Then it all came rushing back. The courtroom, Victoria's testimony, the feeling of everything spinning out of control. Her hands immediately went to her belly, panic rising in her chest. "Hey, take it easy," came a familiar voice. Marcus was sitting in a chair beside her bed looking exhausted. His hair was messy and his tie was loose, like he had been running his hands through it for hours. "The baby is fine. The doctors checked everything twice. Your blood pressure spiked really high, but both of you are okay now." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by anger. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Shouldn't you be back in court with your girlfriend?" The words came out harsher than she intended, but she was too tired and hurt to care about being polite. Marcus winced like she had slapped him. "Sarah, I know you don't want to hear this right now, but I need you to know I never told Victoria those things she said in court. About you being cold, about you only caring about getting pregnant. I would never say that about you to anyone." He leaned forward in his chair. "Yes, I had an affair. Yes, I made terrible choices. But I never talked about our private life with her the way she claimed." A nurse came in to check Sarah's blood pressure and adjust her IV. "Mrs. Martinez, you gave everyone quite a scare," she said kindly. "Your blood pressure was dangerously high when you came in. We're going to keep you overnight for observation, just to make sure you and the baby stay stable." After the nurse left, Sarah and Marcus sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes. "The court case is postponed," Marcus finally said. "Judge Harrison said we'll reconvene next week after you're feeling better. Mrs. Chen is working on some things while we wait." There was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him more carefully. He seemed nervous, but not the way someone would be nervous about a paternity test. It was more like he was hiding something. Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Chen was in her office working late into the evening. Something about Victoria's testimony had been bothering her all day, beyond just how cruel it had been to Sarah. The dates and timeline Victoria had presented were very specific, but they didn't quite add up when Mrs. Chen compared them to the medical records. Victoria's lawyer had provided Mrs. Chen, pulled out her calendar and started marking the dates Victoria claimed to have been with Marcus. Then she looked at the prenatal care records that showed when Victoria's pregnancy had been confirmed and what the estimated conception date was. According to the medical records, Victoria would have gotten pregnant in late February or early March, but Victoria had testified that she first met Marcus in March and that their relationship developed over several months before she got pregnant. This discrepancy might have been easy to miss if Mrs. Chen hadn't been a family law attorney for 15 years. She had seen enough paternity cases to know that women sometimes fudged dates to make their stories sound better, but usually not by this much. Victoria's story had a gap of at least 6 weeks that didn't make sense. Mrs. Chen decided to call the private investigator that Sarah had mentioned hiring months earlier. She had almost forgotten about him in all the drama, but maybe he had found something useful. When she reached him on his cell phone, his first words surprised her. "I was hoping you'd call," said Detective Ray Morrison. "I've been trying to reach Mrs. Martinez for weeks, but I know she's been dealing with a lot. I found some things about Victoria Blake that your client needs to know about." Mrs. Chen grabbed a pen and started taking notes. "Victoria Blake isn't her real name," Detective Morrison continued. "Her real name is Victoria Brennan, and she's done this before. Twice that I can confirm, maybe more. She targets married men, claims they fathered her child, and settles out of court for cash payments. She's smart about it. She moves to different states and uses slightly different names each time." Mrs. Chen felt her heart racing. "Do you have proof of this?" "I have court records from Texas and Florida. In Texas, she was Victoria Bryant and claimed a man named David Chen was her baby's father. That case settled for $40,000. In Florida, she was Victoria Bell and went after a guy named Robert Martinez, settled for $60,000. Notice how she picks names similar to her real name and similar to her target's names? Makes it easier to keep her stories straight." Mrs. Chen was writing furiously now. "What about the babies? Are any of these men actually the fathers?" "That's the interesting part," Detective Morrison said. "In the Texas case, the man insisted on a DNA test before settling. It came back negative. He wasn't the father. But by then, Victoria had already received a partial payment, and she disappeared before the final hearing. The real father was apparently a guy she had dated briefly who didn't have any money. Mrs. Chen felt like pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. "So she targets men who can afford to pay?" "Exactly. She researches them first. Marcus Martinez has a good job, a house, stable income. Perfect target. She probably spent weeks learning about his marriage, his travel schedule, his personality. That's how she knew so many personal details about him and Sarah." After hanging up with the detective, Mrs. Chen immediately called Marcus. She knew he was at the hospital with Sarah, but this couldn't wait. When Marcus answered, she could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Mrs. Chen said. "The DNA test that Victoria's lawyer has been trying to delay, did you already take one privately?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yes," Marcus finally admitted. "I took one 3 weeks ago through my lawyer. I was too scared to tell Sarah because I didn't want to get her hopes up if the results were bad. But Mrs. Chen, I'm not the father. The test came back negative." Mrs. Chen almost dropped the phone. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me this earlier? Why didn't you tell the court?" "My lawyer said we should wait until Victoria's side was ready to present their DNA evidence. He said it would look better if we revealed it in response to their claims rather than seeming like we were trying to hide something. But after what happened to Sarah today, I don't care about legal strategy anymore. I just want this to be over." Mrs. Chen was already planning their next moves. "Marcus, I need you to get me those DNA results first thing tomorrow morning. And I need Sarah to know about the investigator's findings. This isn't just about your case anymore. Victoria is a con artist. And she's probably planning to do this to other families, too." The next morning, Sarah was feeling better physically, but emotionally she was still struggling. The doctor had cleared her to go home, but she had barely spoken to Marcus during the ride. She felt betrayed not just by the affair, but by the fact that he had taken a DNA test without telling her. Even if the results were good, it felt like another secret in a marriage that seemed to be full of them. Mrs. Chen came to their house that afternoon with a thick folder of documents. "Sarah, I know you're angry with Marcus right now, and you have every right to be. But I need you to hear what we've discovered about Victoria Blake." She spread the papers out on their kitchen table. Court records, investigative reports, copies of legal documents from other states. As Sarah read through the evidence, her anger started to shift from Marcus to Victoria. This woman had deliberately targeted their marriage, had researched their personal struggles, had used Sarah's fertility fears as weapons against her. Victoria hadn't just slept with Sarah's husband. She had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy their lives for money. She knew exactly what to say to hurt me, Sarah said quietly, looking at the psychological profile the investigator had put together. She knew about our fertility struggles, about Marcus's travel schedule, about our anniversary. She used all of it against us. Marcus reached across the table toward Sarah's hand, but she pulled it away. She wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but at least now she understood that Victoria's testimony had been more fiction than fact. The intimate details, the private conversations, the promises of love, most of it had probably been lies designed to make Sarah suffer as much as possible. Mrs. Chen closed the folder. We go back to court in 3 days. When we do, we're not just defending against a paternity claim anymore. We're exposing a con artist who has been preying on families for years. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the same courtroom where she had collapsed, but everything felt different now. She was still angry with Marcus, still hurt by his betrayal, but her fury had found a new target. Victoria Blake sat across the aisle, looking as confident as ever, bouncing little Jason on her lap and occasionally glancing at Sarah with that same satisfied smirk. What Victoria didn't know was that her world was about to come crashing down. Sarah had spent the last 3 days reading through every document Detective Morrison had gathered. The patterns were clear once you knew what to look for. Victoria would spend weeks researching her targets, learning their routines, their weaknesses, their personal lives. She had done her homework on Marcus and Sarah better than most college students studied for finals. Mrs. Chen had explained how Victoria's scam worked. First, she would identify a married man with money who traveled for work. Then she would find a way to meet him, usually through work connections or at hotels in cities where he had business trips. She would sleep with him once or twice, just enough to make the affair believable. But the baby she claimed was his was usually already conceived by someone else, often a boyfriend who didn't have money to pay child support. The genius of Victoria's plan was that most men were too ashamed and scared to fight a paternity claim. They would rather pay quietly than have their wives find out about the affair in a public court battle. But Marcus had been different. When Victoria first contacted him claiming he was Jason's father, he had immediately told Sarah about the affair. That honesty had probably saved their marriage, even though it had nearly destroyed it in the process. Judge Harrison called the court to order, and Victoria's lawyer stood up to continue presenting their case. He looked less confident than he had 3 days earlier, but he was still going through the motions. Your Honor, my client would like to continue her testimony about the ongoing relationship with Mr. Martinez and his responsibilities as a father to their son. Victoria took the witness stand again, settling Jason on her lap. She looked directly at Sarah as she began to speak, as if she wanted to make sure Sarah felt every word. As I was saying before we were interrupted, Victoria began, with a slight emphasis on the word interrupted that made Sarah's blood boil. Marcus was very involved in planning for our son's future. Mrs. Chen stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is testifying about events that we now have reason to believe never occurred. Judge Harrison looked interested. What do you mean, Counselor? Your Honor, we have discovered new evidence about the witness's background that calls into question the truthfulness of her entire testimony. We request permission to cross-examine the witness about her history of similar claims against other men. Victoria's lawyer jumped up immediately. Objection! Any previous relationships my client may have had are irrelevant to this case. But Sarah could see that Victoria's face had gone pale. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria looked worried. Judge Harrison thought for a moment. I'll allow some questioning about the witness's background, but keep it relevant to the current case. Proceed, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen approached the witness stand with a folder in her hands. Ms. Blake, is Victoria Blake your real name? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Victoria shifted Jason to her other arm, buying time. Yes, of course it is. Are you sure about that? Because I have records showing that a woman named Victoria Brennan, who looks remarkably similar to you, filed a paternity claim against a man named David Chen in Dallas, Texas in 2022. Would you like to see these records? Victoria's lawyer was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is harassment of my client. But his voice sounded less sure than before. and Sarah noticed that he was looking at Victoria with a puzzled expression, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Mrs. Chen continued without waiting for the objection to be ruled on. And then there was the case of Victoria Bell versus Robert Martinez in Tampa, Florida in 2023. That's an interesting choice of names, don't you think? Victoria Bell, claiming that Robert Martinez was her baby's father. Very similar to your current claim against Marcus Martinez. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly now, though she was trying to hide it. I don't know what you're talking about. Those must be different people. Different people who all happen to look exactly like you? Different people who all used similar fake names? Different people who all had babies they claimed were fathered by married men with money? Mrs. Chen's voice was getting stronger with each question. Sarah watched Victoria's face carefully. The confident mask was slipping, and underneath it, Sarah could see something cold and calculating. This wasn't a hurt woman seeking justice for her child. This was someone who had been caught in a lie and was desperately trying to find a way out. Ms. Blake, or Ms. Brennan, or whatever your real name is, Mrs. Chen continued, can you explain to the court why you told David Chen in Texas that your baby was conceived in January 2022, but told the court in Florida that the same baby was conceived in March 2022? That's quite a long pregnancy, don't you think? Victoria's lawyer was frantically flipping through papers, clearly realizing that his client had been lying to him. Your Honor, I request a recess so I can consult with my client. But Mrs. Chen wasn't done. And can you explain why the baby you claimed was David Chen's in Texas appears to be the same baby you're claiming is Robert Martinez's in Florida, and now Marcus Martinez's here? Do you have 3 babies that all look identical? Or is this the same child you've been using in multiple fraud schemes? The courtroom was dead silent except for Jason's babbling. Victoria looked around desperately, like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. That's not... You don't understand. What I understand, Mrs. Chen said, pulling out more documents, is that you have been running the same con game for years. You target married men, learn everything you can about their personal lives, sleep with them once or twice to make the affair believable, and then claim they fathered a child that was actually fathered by someone else entirely. Victoria's lawyer had gone completely white. He leaned over to whisper something to Victoria, but she shook her head violently. Sarah could see that he was realizing his client had made him an unknowing accomplice to fraud. Ms. Blake, Mrs. Chen continued, would you like to explain to the court how you knew so many intimate details about Mr. and Mrs. Martinez's marriage? Details about their fertility struggles, their anniversary traditions, their private conversations. Because I have evidence that you spent weeks researching them before you ever met Mr. Martinez, Victoria finally snapped. You don't know anything, she shouted, standing up so quickly that she almost dropped Jason. Marcus told me all those things. He wanted to leave her for me. He said he loved me. But her voice was shrill and desperate now, not at all like the confident woman who had testified 3 days earlier. Really? Mrs. Chen asked calmly. Then can you explain why Mr. Martinez's cell phone records show that on the nights you claim he was calling you for hours-long conversations, he was actually on conference calls with his entire sales team? His co-workers have signed statements confirming these work calls. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked at her lawyer, but he was staring at her with a mixture of anger and disgust. She looked at the judge, but Judge Harrison was watching her with the cold expression of someone who had seen too many liars in his courtroom. Finally, Victoria looked at Sarah, and for a moment, the mask dropped completely. Sarah saw pure hatred in Victoria's eyes, along with frustration that her carefully planned scheme was falling apart. You think you won something? Victoria hissed. Your husband still cheated on you. He still came running when I called. Your perfect marriage is still broken. The words stung because they had some truth to them. Marcus had cheated, and that betrayal would take time to heal. But seeing Victoria's true nature so clearly helped Sarah understand that most of the pain she had been feeling was manufactured by a woman who made a living destroying families. Judge Harrison had heard enough. Miss Blake, I am ordering an immediate recess. You and your attorney need to decide very quickly whether you want to withdraw this claim voluntarily or face criminal charges for perjury and fraud. His voice was ice cold. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. As Victoria hurried out of the courtroom with her lawyer chasing after her, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not just hope that this nightmare would end, but hope that maybe, somehow, she and Marcus could find a way to rebuild what Victoria had tried so hard to destroy. During the 1-hour recess, the courthouse buzzed with whispered conversations. Sarah sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, watching people walk by and trying to process everything that had just happened. Mrs. Chen had stepped outside to take phone calls, and Marcus was sitting a few chairs away, giving Sarah the space she clearly needed. Sarah's sister Elena arrived during the break, having driven 3 hours from Sacramento when she heard about Sarah's collapse. "I got here as fast as I could," Elena said, sitting down beside Sarah and taking her hand. "Marcus called me from the hospital and told me everything." "Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're both fine," Sarah said quietly. "Better than fine, actually. I think I'm finally starting to understand what's been happening to us." She looked over at Marcus, who was staring at his hands. "Elena, I know Marcus made a terrible mistake, but that woman in there, she's evil. She planned all of this. She wanted to destroy our marriage for money." Elena squeezed Sarah's hand. "But you're going to be okay? You and Marcus?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet. The affair still happened. Marcus still lied to me for months. But at least now I know that most of the things she said in court were lies designed to hurt me. That helps somehow." Down the hall, Victoria was having a very different conversation with her lawyer. Through the thin walls, people could hear raised voices, though not the exact words. Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had realized that his client had been lying to him from day one, and he was not happy about it. Mrs. Chen came back from her phone calls with a satisfied expression. "I just spoke with the district attorney's office," she told Sarah. "They're very interested in Victoria's pattern of fraud. If we can prove she's been doing this in multiple states, she could face serious federal charges." "What about the DNA test?" Sarah asked. "Marcus told me he already took one, but Victoria's side has been trying to delay getting one done through the court." "That's about to become irrelevant," Mrs. Chen said with a small smile. "The judge ordered an expedited test 3 days ago when you were in the hospital. The results came back this morning." She held up a sealed envelope. "Judge Harrison has them, and he's planning to read them in court when we go back in." Sarah felt her heart racing. Even though Marcus had told her his private test was negative, she wouldn't feel completely safe until she heard it from the judge. Too much had happened for her to trust anything completely. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was completely different from an hour earlier. Victoria looked like she had been crying, though Sarah suspected they might be fake tears for the judge's benefit. Her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Judge Harrison took his seat and looked sternly around the courtroom. "Before we continue, I want to address what happened during the last session. Ms. Blake, your testimony contained numerous inconsistencies and apparent falsehoods. Your attorney has informed me that you wish to make a statement." Victoria stood up slowly, holding Jason against her chest like a shield. "Your Honor, I may have gotten some dates confused. It's been a stressful time, being a single mother, and trying to remember everything exactly." Her voice was much quieter than before, and she wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Mrs. Chen stood up. "Your Honor, getting dates confused is one thing, but we have evidence that Ms. Blake has filed similar paternity claims against men in at least 2 other states under different names. This isn't confusion, this is a pattern of deliberate fraud." Judge Harrison nodded grimly. "I've reviewed the evidence your office submitted, Mrs. Chen. Ms. Blake, these are very serious allegations. Before we proceed any further, I think it's time we settled the basic question that brought us here today." He picked up the sealed envelope containing the DNA test results. Sarah felt like everything was moving in slow motion. This was the moment that would determine whether her marriage could be saved, or whether Marcus really was the father of another woman's child. She gripped Elena's hand so tightly that her sister winced. The DNA test was performed by the state-certified laboratory using samples from Marcus Martinez, Victoria Blake, and the minor child Jason Blake, Judge Harrison began. His voice was formal and careful, the way judges speak when they're about to deliver life-changing news. Victoria was staring at the judge with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. It wasn't the confident look she had worn for most of the case, but it wasn't exactly fear either. It was more like resignation, as if she already knew what the results would say. "The results show," Judge Harrison continued, opening the envelope with deliberate slowness, "with 99.9% certainty that Marcus Martinez is not the biological father of the minor child Jason Blake." The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning sank in. Sarah felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. The relief was so overwhelming that she started crying, but these were tears of joy mixed with exhaustion. Marcus let out a long breath that sounded like he had been holding it for 6 months, but Victoria's reaction was the most telling of all. Instead of looking shocked or devastated like a woman who had just learned that the man she thought was her child's father wasn't, Victoria just closed her eyes and nodded slightly, as if confirming something she had already known. Judge Harrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court has received evidence suggesting that Ms. Blake has engaged in a pattern of fraudulent paternity claims in multiple jurisdictions. Ms. Blake, do you have anything to say about these allegations?" Victoria looked around the courtroom one last time. Her eyes met Sarah's, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something that might have been genuine emotion, not remorse exactly, but maybe exhaustion from keeping up the lies for so long. "Your Honor," Victoria said quietly, "I would like to withdraw my claim against Mr. Martinez." Her lawyer started to stand up, probably to advise her not to say anything else, but Victoria continued talking. "And I want to apologize to Mrs. Martinez for the things I said about her marriage. That wasn't right. It wasn't a full confession, but it was close enough." Sarah could see that Victoria was trying to minimize the damage, hoping that withdrawing the case might help her avoid criminal charges. But the damage was already done. Detective Morrison had gathered evidence from multiple states, and the federal investigators were already building their case. Judge Harrison looked at Victoria with the expression of someone who had seen every kind of lie and manipulation in his courtroom. "Ms. Blake, I am dismissing this case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. However, I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible criminal fraud charges." He turned to Sarah and Marcus. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I want to apologize that you had to endure this ordeal. No family should have to go through what Ms. Blake put you through." His voice softened slightly. "I hope you can use this experience to rebuild and strengthen your marriage." As the judge's gavel came down, officially ending the case, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the nightmare was over, anger at Victoria for the months of torture she had put them through, and underneath it all, uncertainty about what came next for her and Marcus. Victoria gathered her things quickly and left the courtroom without looking back, her lawyer trailing behind her with an expression of disgust. As she walked past Sarah's row, she paused for just a second. "I really am sorry," she whispered, so quietly that only Sarah could hear. Then she was gone, carrying Jason out of their lives forever. Marcus turned to Sarah, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Sarah, I know I have a lot of work to do to earn your trust back. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I love you, and I love our daughter, and I want to spend the rest of my life making this right." Sarah looked at her husband, really looked at him, for the first time in months. She could see the man she had fallen in love with, but she could also see the pain and guilt he was carrying. The affair had happened, and that would always be part of their story. But Victoria's lies and manipulation had made everything so much worse, twisting the truth until Sarah couldn't tell what was real anymore. "I don't forgive you yet," Sarah said honestly. "It's going to take time and probably counseling, and a lot of hard work from both of us. But Marcus, I want to try. I want our daughter to grow up in a family that fought for each other, not one that gave up when things got hard." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Sarah felt the baby kick strongly inside her belly, as if their daughter was eager to be born into a world where the truth had finally won. There would be more challenges ahead, more conversations to have, more healing to do. But for the first time in months, Sarah believed that their family might actually make it through this stronger than before.